Alright, so just testing, just making sure everything is going well, or very well, I should say. And make sure it. Sorry, I'm having all these issues. I hate when this happens, but I'm going to I don't know why I'm having all these technical difficulties, but I can't see the preview on this side. However, looks like everything is up and ready to go. Just getting all the kinks kicked out, but I think we are about ready to get started. So my name is Jamal Barnes. That is my name. And this is actually my first day doing first night I should say, doing this class. It's about Windows Server 2019. As mentioned in the title, however, I am not just going to be talking about Windows Server 2019. I am also going to be mentioning about Azure. And the reason is that this is where Microsoft wants everybody to go. That is where the industry is headed, and so unfortunately they're no longer doing a certification or an exam on Windows Server 2019. Instead, they're having everybody go to Azure. However, that doesn't mean that every organization is going to go to Azure. That is just where Microsoft is headed as far as certifications. Now, I do have my Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert certification in Windows Server and Core Infrastructure. So which I accomplished last year. So I have shared this on LinkedIn, but I'm not going to do too much talking other than I'm going to go ahead and get started. Now, the reason I haven't been doing a lot of videos on this channel over the last, I'd say about 10 or 11 years now, is because the laptop that I had, unfortunately, just wasn't capable of doing things or videos like this. And so, I decided to just go ahead and build me a machine, and here we are. So, I'm going to just go ahead and get started. As you can see, on the background, you may see PowerShell. As I mentioned, I don't know if you all saw me on LinkedIn, but I did mention that this course is not going to be just a point-and-click class, meaning that everything is going to be just in the GUI. You're going to see a lot of this, a lot of PowerShell, and some Azure on top of it. Now, tonight, I'm going to keep away from the Azure. I'm going to save that for when we get to another part of the course. So tonight is not going to be that type of night. So I guess I should start with, I'm going to start with this little website, and which I usually do a Google search for. It's called Microsoft Server 2019. Now usually or sometimes I'll Google Windows Server 2019 if I need to. Hang on a second. And what I usually do for courses like this, I usually go to the Microsoft Evaluation Center, right here, on this link. Of course, I'm using the Bing search. I'm also using a Windows 10 Enterprise machine. Now, some folks might be using Windows 10 Home, which in my humble opinion, I highly do not recommend. I recommend folks to be using at least Windows 10 Pro or Windows 10 Enterprise, like I am currently using. So, I do have Hyper-V also installed on my machine. Some folks do use VM VirtualBox, which I'm going to be honest, I do not recommend using VM VirtualBox just because of security reasons, and there's a lot of hacks associated with Oracle VM VirtualBox. I have seen some folks use VMware. However, VMware has its own set of licensing issues, so I'm going to just stick with Hyper-V. As you will see, which by the way comes standard if you have Windows Server in the GUI interface. But I'm using a Windows 10 version, as you'll see right here. The only difference between Hyper-V Manager and Windows 10 and Hyper-V Manager and Windows Server is literally just a couple of little features, which I'll go into in a later course on another day. But for now, I want to start by talking about the different editions of Windows Server. And the main ones that you should be familiar with are Windows Server Standard, or Windows Server 2019 Standard, Windows Server 2019 Data Center, and Windows Server 2019 Essentials. Okay, there's a few other ones like Hyper-V Server, which you should be familiar with. And there's a couple other ones, but to be honest with you, the rest of those editions I typically don't even see in many corporate environments. Remember I said this course was going to cater to how you do it in your corporate environment. So that is for starters, that's the different editions. Core, the difference between Core versus GUI. Okay, I'll start with that first, and then I'll start downloading this ISO, and you can do this in a virtualized environment because that's typically how company environments are these days. The main difference is that GUI interface, obviously, which is also known as graphical user interface, which is essentially what you see right now in my background. That is graphical user interface. Core, you will not see a graphical user interface. Instead, you're going to see a little black box. Once you install Windows Server, it's just going to have a black box, and that black box will be command prompt. You can run PowerShell through command prompt. Okay? And we'll get into that a little bit more once we'll get started. Which, by the way, I prefer running servers in Core than I do graphical user interface. That's just my preference. Not only for security reasons, but also it's just a lot quicker, and there's not a lot of what I like to call headroom. So if someone was to infect it with ransomware or anything like that, it's lower risk for me to run server core than it is GUI interface. Now, I want to put an asterisk before I say that, because there are certain roles and there are certain features that unfortunately you cannot run in server core. There are certain ones, and we'll get into those, like things like Azure Active Directory, things like advanced threat analytics, that kind of stuff. And there's a few other things you can't run. Oh, and Skype for Business Server. You can't run those in a core server. You can only run those on a graphical user interface. In this class, I am not going to mention about Skype for Business Server because Microsoft wants everyone to move to Microsoft Teams. And remember, I said at the beginning that I'm going to be embracing the cloud as well as on-premises. So, let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and this is where you would get a evaluation copy, which you can get from Microsoft's own website. The free options you'll get is Azure, if you have an Azure account. VHD, if you want to run this on like VMware or Hyper-V or things like that. The version I normally choose is ISO, so that way if I decide I can put it on a VM, it gives me the best flexibility, whether I can put it on a flash drive, or do I want to boot it on a virtual machine, or do I want to boot it to a CD, which most people these days, I've never seen IT pros use CD unless it's a government environment. So, let's get started. I guess I'll just click on ISO, and then it'll ask you to fill out a form. So I am going to we'll go ahead and fill out this form, and it gives you, it's a lot of marketing information, like company size. I usually make this up. I'll say like 50 to 250. I'll say system administrator. And work email, I'll just use one of my personal emails that I have. I have about 3 of them. And then work phone number, I'll just use my personal phone number for this. Okay. And then country and region, we'll make sure to set this to United States. see if I can find United States. Alright, and it'll give you this option, I would like information, tips, and offers. Basically just a bunch of marketing emails. I'm going to uncheck that, hit continue. And then it'll say select your language. I'm going to choose English. And then I'm going to go ahead and download our ISO. Okay. And you'll see this about, it should take about, because I'm using a cable connection, it depends on what connection you're using. If you're using cable or Fios, it's probably not going to take that long for the file to download. Once that downloads, we'll go ahead and I'm going to run it through Hyper-V, as you'll see right here. Alright. Now, what I'm also going to mention while this is downloading, I want to do a brief synopsis of Windows Server 2012. R2, me personally, I'm not a big fan of Windows Server 2012 R2. It is an older version, and Microsoft is getting ready to put that to end of life in the next 2 years. There's some big differences between 2012 R2 and Windows Server 2016 and even Windows Server 2019. However, Windows Server 2016 and 2019 are the same, except 2019, in my humble opinion, just performs a lot better and just does a lot of what I need to do without any issues, whereas Windows Server 2016, it takes forever for little things like pushing Windows updates. Okay, so as you can see, we have our ISO is already downloaded. Now, what I'm going to do is before I do this, I'm going to, because I have a machine, I'm running a machine that has several hard drives on it. So what I'm going to do is just go through and make a new, what I like to call, activate this other drive. And this is where I'm going to keep all of the ISOs. So I'm going to bring this little box up, which will be you will see as computer management, and then under disk management, this is the other drive I want to activate. For right now, I'm just going to do new simple volume, hit next for all these prompts, make it, I guess I'll make it F, I'll keep it as F, and then I'm going to leave everything as defaults and hit ISOs. Okay, let's call it ISOs or whatever, and then hit finish. And then what is going to happen is that now it's going to come up as a simple volume. Of course, I'm running things a little bit different here, but this is just this is just a simple volume, and we're just using this for file storage. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go over to downloads, which is this PC. Oh, actually, I'm going to go up to downloads, grab this ISO that we just downloaded. Now, you may not, like I said, you may not see certain things as I'm running a bunch of different monitors going on, but you'll see the bulk of what I'm doing. So basically I'm just going to copy it and put it in our ISOs drive and then hit paste. So I'll take it out of the downloads folder. Well, not so much take it out, but it's a copy of it from the downloads folder, and I just put it in this drive here. Alright. Now, what I'm going to do now is, what we're doing is, and as you see from the title, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create several domain controllers. Now you may say, well, what exactly is a domain controller? That is what is used to connect, where you join all your machines over to a server and everything is centrally managed. Now, of course, all of this is on-prem. Again, I have not done this from the cloud just yet, but this is how you would do it from on-prem. I'm going to click New. I'm going to make this one. We're going to actually, I'm wondering, should I do it from PowerShell? Yes, because we're going to make this a core server anyway. So I think what we'll probably do is I'm going to make this a from PowerShell. How you make a virtual machine. So let's bring the PowerShell box back up. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do change directory to what is it? Jesus, make sure there's nothing on it, which there shouldn't. When I run ls, ls is a command in PowerShell that lists everything, so to speak. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder. So new -item -name VMs. And again, if this is your corporate environment, you certainly can do it this way. So the name will be VMs. And then F is g/VMs, and then item, then -item type, we'll say is directory. If you do not put item type in here, it will instead just automatically just create a file. So, and what you should see is this right here. D under mode, D says is directory. So we made a folder, and if you want to verify, I can do it one of two ways. I can do it ls, and it will show you that the folder is created, or I can click down here, and I can go up to this PC, and I can go to G, and this is the folder that we just created right here. So this just verifies one example of any directories that you see from that I saw from PowerShell. I just made it right from here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this VM from PowerShell. So, because the GUI, the graphical user interface, is very limited. Just a heads up, the graphical user interface for the Hyper-V Manager is very, very limited compared to the things that I can do from PowerShell. All right. So, new -VM, -name of the VM. I'm going to call this domain controller 01. So you want to have, because there's 5 different parts of a domain controller. There's a schema master, there's a domain master, there is a RDC, it's a RID master. You have another one called the PDC master, and then you also have what's called the infrastructure master. So you want to have, for your domain controllers, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, make sure you have more than one domain controller. And the reason being is, in case there's an issue in your environment, and one domain controller falls, you still have other domain controllers that can take the slack. So, I'm going to say name is this, generation. There's different, and we'll get into, when we get into Hyper-V part of server, we'll get into this, the difference between Gen 1. There's a difference between a Gen 1 and a Gen 2. A Gen 2 equals extra security. Gen 1 is the old legacy technology. So I'm going to make this a Gen 2 because I want that extra technology, extra security. And then I want to do memory. I'm going to give this, because it's core, so I'll give this 1 gig. And then new VHD path, g/VMs /v, and then VHDX, and then new VHD size bytes. We'll give this 100. When I was trial running this, I was trying it at 30 gigs, and what happens is with Microsoft, if you set it too low, the size of the VM too low, it will get corrupted and it will cause issues. And then what I want, I'm just going to tab over switch thing, because I already created a switch, but if you haven't, if it's your first time doing this, you might want to create a switch. By a switch, I mean a virtual switch. So, XT. And by the way, this is all external switch to make things much easier for me. And then, and I think that's all we need for this part. And then we'll just press enter. Okay, what the mistake I just made. So, and you may see this, if it's your first time doing this, you will see this. I kind of did this on purpose. You get this error message, you do not have the required permissions, and that is because when I ran PowerShell, I didn't run it as an administrator. So I'm going to close out of it. Actually, we'll close out of this, close out of that, and what I'm going to do is just right click, run as admin, and we'll do the same thing again. Okay? So, let's try again. New -VM, -name, BRNSDC, on this SRV, memory, startup, bytes, I'll give this one gigabyte, generation 2, let's see, BHD path, let's VMs, CO1, SRV. That, which by the way, that generates the directory. So, v.ehdx, VHD size, v-size bytes, make this 100 gigs. Which name is ECT or EXT, yeah, rather. And then I'm just going to, do I have everything I need? You've got, let's make sure. Also, if you need to, you can just do a parameter just like that and just hit your tab key a couple times and it'll generate these different parameters that you can put in case I forgot something. But I think that's all I need. So press enter. And now we have just created our first virtual machine. Now, that does not mean that I have added an ISO to this VM. So in order to make this bootable, okay, what we have to do is we have to add the ISO to our virtual machine. So I'm going to run add-vm, VM DVD drive dash, so probably call it VM name, and you call it V01 SRV dash path. And there's another trick I found. I can actually do this. And let's see, did I? That's not it. So there she is. So right there, remember that ISO that I put in from the other drive? And there it is. So we'll go ahead and just press enter there. Now that ISO has been added to our virtual machine. And once we do this, just do VM connect, which will then bring up this little box. When you run this, you'll see this little box right here. And of course it's going to say localhost. And I'm just going to point to that virtual machine. And then you'll see this box will then show up. And then what I'm going to do, one other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the DVD spins up first. Make sure that that's top priority. And then hit apply. Click OK. And then hit start. Alright. And I'll tell you what, why don't we just reset that. And sometimes this happens. Sometimes it gets a little glitchy sometimes. So I am going to go ahead and just turn this off and then restart this back up. And then, because I've installed this many times, and you'll see this show up. This is if you're booting from a flash drive, if you're booting it from a CD, if you're booting it from Azure, or what have you, you will see this show up. Now, notice how it looks similar to Windows 10. At least when you're installing it, it looks very, very similar. We'll hit install now, and then you'll see this option that says setup is starting. Okay. And what I'm going to do, because I said we were going to use Server Core for this installation, it'll give you two options. It'll give you four options technically, but two editions. So you'll get standard, which basically you'll have there's a few features that are omitted from the standard edition, and those features are relating to failover clustering and a few other different things, or like network load balancers and things like that. So I have to choose data center if you want almost every feature out there on the Windows Server side. So we'll then click next, and I'm going to. This comes up with the EULA, or license terms and conditions. I've read this many, many times. So we'll check off I accept the license agreement, license terms, and then hit next. And then it'll give you this option: what type of installation do you want? This option is upgrade. I advise folks not to do an upgrade on Windows Server if you can help, but I'd rather you just do a server migration. Trust me, you'll thank me later. And then you'll see the allocated space, and you see the total space of 100 gigs. That is because I have allocated 100 gigs for this VM. So we'll hit new, hit apply, hit OK on that box, and then it'll create its needed partitions or whatnot, and then we'll just hit next, and then it's going to go ahead and install. Because I'm using a solid state drive, this is not going to take very long to install at all. It's actually the quickest I've said, but I'm using Server Core, so it's going to install a lot quicker than in the older days of like a Windows XP or a Windows 2000. Those were back during the times of when you were using spinning Rust and there were no SSDs. So once this installs, you will see once it finishes, it's going to come up with the black box, the lovely black box, as I like to call it. I call it the black box. It's a command prompt box, but I like it. So, also just a heads up, if you're running Server Core and you need to activate it, make sure you know the command slmgr.vbs. And S, because that is very important if you need to get this activated. Because I'm using a evaluation copy, I will not need to activate this at all because I'm using an evaluation copy, and that usually lasts for about 180 days. So about 6 months. Okay? And you'll see it's going to do its thing. Getting ready. And this goes for every server that you built. This is the initial, whether it's a domain controller, file server, DHCP server, things like that. This is always the initial part of the process. I will show one of the domain controllers will have a GUI on it, and that's because we're going to be pushing Azure Active Directory, and that requires a graphical user interface. So this box will show up because I've enabled enhanced session mode on my hypervisor. So I'm going to keep this at full screen, and then we'll hit connect. Alright, and you'll see this lovely black box that I was talking about earlier. There you go. And then I'm going to just hit OK. Basically it's saying I need to change my password. This is just for the local admin account. We have not made this a domain controller yet, and I have my reasons for that. There's a couple things we need to do first before we get started. Now, I'm just changing my password, and then you'll see that this little box will show up. It'll come up with just a command prompt box. So you're probably thinking, what in the world is this? I don't recognize this. Well, this is command line before Microsoft instituted PowerShell. Now, of course, I said I was going to do everything PowerShell for this server. So, what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go ahead and type PowerShell, or if you want to see the blue screen earlier, like we showed earlier, just type in start PowerShell. And then this will show up. Just like, or should I say, similar to how you were doing it on as you saw on the Windows 10 box of going through PowerShell. So, first thing I want to do is I want to rename this machine. So I'm going to type in rename dash computer dash new name and then name it to this server. And it makes it easier to identify whatever we need to do. And then whatever I need, so that I know what server is having issues, or I need to decommission a server or a machine or whatnot, I can do it right from there. So this is dash new name. Okay, then I'm going to add a parameter, restart. What this means is it's going to rename that machine to this name and then restart. Now, I could have just done this, but I'm not going to run this just yet because I'm going to show you something. If we just ran hostname, it's going to give you this name, which I do not want. For ease of use, if I need to remote in or something like that, or I can get in or in with no problem, I can go from there. So, I'm going to do that again. Rename dash computer dash new name. SRV, and then restart. And then what happens, that will then restart the machine with the new name, and I'll show you that we verified that that is the correct name that we need. Alright, so start PowerShell, because I'm going to kind of show you to make it look a little bit clearer in this little box. So now, when you type in hostname, there it is. This is the new name right there. You do this for every server that you're building, and whether it's core, I can even do this in the GUI, but we're not doing that for that reason. Okay, next thing what I want to do, and this is something I always tell folks, make sure that the machine that you're building the server on is up to date with all the latest security updates, security patches. It doesn't matter what server you're building. Make sure it's up to date. So, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this. Install module, PS, Windows Update. So we'll start with that first. Okay? And then it'll give you this option. Now, of course, I got to add extra parameters, and this one not a couple at all, but I'm just showing you what happens when if you just run it that way. We'll hit yes to both of these. And I am going to... Why are we having issues? So let's see. Because this is something else you might run into. And we're unable to ping that DNS. So what I'm going to do is let's go back and then go back to the main from the Windows 10 box, get dash VM switch, and make sure that this is external, which it is. And then what we might have to do is we're having some connectivity issues. So what I'm going to do is do this, is what I usually do from time to time. So let's go back. Hang on. 1 second. There we go. Now we'll have new dash IP. So we'll do a IP config /all. And as you can see, there is, I think we found our issue, which is it's not picking up the switch that we created. So it's not picking that up, which is part of the reason why it's having some issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just minimize this for a second. Go back up to network connection. So we'll go into the GUI for a second. And I'm going to go back on to this, because this is what happens in a real environment. Believe it or not, things like this can happen. Going to network and just make sure that this is here. Alright. So now there's a so it's running that. Because it's pulling from the wrong switch. So what I'm going to do, I think I see what our problem is. I think I did what our problem is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove this one. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is disable, re-enable. And what you might have to do is just change our switch. So what I'm going to do is go back up to PowerShell and just change the switch that it's connected to. But first, I want to make sure that if it exists or not. And you'll see this is the Intel. Now, of course, what I'm going to go ahead and do for 1 second, it's not pointing to the real tag because my system board has 2 NIC cards on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and switch connections. Okay, we might get disconnected temporarily. Disconnect for a minute. All right, I think we're back on. We're back on live. Okay, so it was on the wrong NIC, I bet. So let's see if this is going the way it's supposed to. Sometimes you have to do some troubleshooting. And let's see now if that pings the way it's supposed to. And what should happen? There she is. She's pinging the IP address. Of course, that is IPv6. So now let's go ahead and rerun that command once again. And we'll say yes. And then it'll give you this option that says you are installing the modules from an untrusted repository. And if you trust this repository, change its installation policy value by running the set-ps repository commandlet. Are you sure you want to install the modules from PS Gallery? I'm going to say A, just press A, and hit enter. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this command called import-module. That module that we just installed. And go ahead and run that. And then I'm going to run a command called get-rulelist with a parameter Microsoft. And the reason that I'm doing it this way is because if I do not choose that, it does not pull every update that is available for this server. Okay? So we'll start with that first. All right? Now, and what I'm going to go ahead and do now is we're going to run install - Windows Update - Microsoft Update, and another parameter called accept all, because we're going to accept all these updates that are on this list, and then force download, because we're going to download all of the updates that are on this list, and then force install. It's going to what is going to happen, which means it will then install these, and I'm going to run verbose because it's that way I can see exactly what's going on. Hit enter, and what's going to then happen is you'll see that all these updates are now going to install on this server. And you can do this, you should be doing this on any and every server that you build. I cannot stress this enough. Make sure, especially for security reasons. And this is going to take a little bit because this update is a 15 gig update. Thanks to, which isn't that. You can, yes, You can run this on your updates through PowerShell, just like I'm doing here. I'm just using Windows Server to run this, but you could certainly use the PowerShell command and run this. Now, that does not mean that it's not hit or miss. I have seen, even in my company environment, I have seen where I've tried this in a corporate environment, and I have seen where I have run into issues if you run this in the graphical user interface. So, I know for a fact everybody is familiar with the settings app on Windows 10, and you can go through and run your updates that way, and that is fine and dandy. But what if you do not have the graphical user interface? Then this is how you would do it. Now, there is another way you can run updates, and that is if you're doing sconfig, which I will show you on the next domain controller that I set up. So, that sconfig gets a little bit easier than this way. But if you're familiar with both multiple ways of doing things, as the saying goes, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. So, in this case, I'm doing it on this one, I'm doing it all PowerShell. Nothing else. I can configure an entire server right through this. It's not hard. It's really, really not. Once you get the hang of it, I know sometimes when you learn something new, it comes a little foreign to you. It looks a little intimidating at first. But this is how all of your servers should be. If you can, put it this way, if you can run RSAT, or if you're new to this, we call this remote server admin tools, you can run it from server core. You do not need a graphical user interface to run that feature. And Microsoft has been getting better with the RSAT, with the whole RSAT thing. Which, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and minimize it. The way you would do it is go to Start, and then you can go up to Settings, which will bring up this little box, and then go up to Apps, and then over here you'll see the section called Optional Features. We'll click on Optional Features, and then hit Add Feature, and then what I'm going to do, you'll see this where it says RSAT, Active Directory Certificate Services, Active Directory Domain Services, BitLocker, DHCP, Failover Clustering. There's a bunch of different tools that you can use. Now, not all server roles are supported by RSAT. Just to give you guys a heads up. There's certain ones, most of which do work in core. Most of them do. But there's a few that just do not work in core, and you have to use a graphical user interface to run them. And it just is what it is. So what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm installing all my RSAT tools to my machine. There's about 21 of them. Well, actually about 22 when you count this CMAC piece, which we talk about on if you've taken the MCSC or the 70-740 to 70-744, you will have seen that come up. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit install. There's about 22 different server roles that are covered in the RSAT environment. I would advise that make sure before you get to this level, if you get some familiarity with the graphical user interface, you can. And once you get familiar with that, go through and play around with PowerShell, play around with command line. You definitely want to learn this. This is something this is one of my, PowerShell is my bread and butter more than anything else. So while that's installing, let's check back on our updates back on the server. And you'll see right here, you see this little top part, little progress bar, because I put verbose on it, but I didn't have to. But verbose will assure me, and I can see exactly what's going on. So, and this is not, by the way, once I finish this, I have to rerun this again to make sure there's no updates. Also, If you're running this on a non-virtual machine and you're running this on-prem, there's one extra step that you have to do, and that is run the PMP util command and make sure that the drivers are installed on that machine. Just want to kind of reiterate this. A graphical user interface, you do not have to worry about this. You can get the executable files from the manufacturer's website, and you just follow the prompts, and there you go. It installs all the drivers. But if you're doing it from core, you do need to run that PMP util utility. Just the FYI. Because I'm running this through a virtual machine, I do not have to use that utility because all the drivers that are on this VM are piggybacking off of the from the hypervisor that is built onto my desktop. So just a kind of a heads up. What else should I mention about? Also, there is this option. There's a couple extra options. One is that I can go and, which I'll show you a little bit later if we have time, which will allow you to remotely administer a server from PowerShell, from your Windows 10 box. That is a PS remoting. There's a command. It's called enable-ps remoting, and there's another one called WinRM base QC, which allows you to do some remote management. Would I recommend in a production environment to enable that? Absolutely not. And the reason I say that for, again, security reasons, making sure everything's secure, and just one less issue to worry about. Because this is a test environment, we'll go ahead and run those commands, and I'll show you that feature. So, that's one other thing I wanted to mention about. The other thing I wanted to mention about, as I said earlier, is that the graphical user interface, while it's nice, fancy, looks very pretty, looks fantastic, even though it may be convoluted at times, it does not mean that it's not limited. It is, in fact, it is very, very limited on what you can do and what you cannot do. And I'll show you what I mean once these updates are completed and once you join a machine to a domain. I know that folks are familiar with, if you're a system admin, you're probably familiar with joining a machine, or your help desk technical support, you're probably familiar with, oh, I can just go to Windows System and join a machine to domain. I get that. I totally understand that you're probably familiar with that because that's what you have been told by senior management, that this is senior management or senior techs or things like that, and that's how you would go through and set that up. However, the biggest thing is, it is very, very limited on what you can do. If you have specific, I'll give you a prime example of how limited it is. If I join a machine, and actually I can show you this. If you go through, actually I'll minimize this because it's taking, because of just talking through. And let's say I go through, I go up to start, go up to Windows System, Control Panel, and I go up to System. This is what, I see this a lot, many work environments. They go right through here, and of course, because I'm using 20H2, just a heads up, they have changed this around a little bit. If you click on Advanced System Settings, we'll bring this little box over here. You do computer name, and you hit change. This is one way of joining a machine to your Active Directory domain. Of course, we're not there yet because we don't have any domain controllers promoted and in shop yet. But if I do it this way, what's going to happen is it's going to put your machine in the computer's container. There are no OUs set up. If you have OUs set up, which we'll talk about OUs later once we get that domain controller set up and situated, the one issue that you're going to have is if you do it that way, if you have OU set up and you join that machine to the domain from where I just showed you, you then have to go into Active Directory and you have to move that machine to the appropriate OU, and then wait. And if you've got GPOs or group policy objects set back to the OU, you'll have to either wait a few hours or you'll have to do a GP update /force to that machine. You can invoke it from group policy management remotely to that machine, but it does take a little bit of time, and there's a little bit of, not so much downtime, but a little bit of latency. But if you do it the way I'm going to show you, if we have time, once this domain controller is set up, I guarantee you it'll be less work for you in the end. Just one way of just showing you how the graphical user interface on Microsoft is very, very limited. So, then now we see reboot is required. We'll say yes, and we're going to go ahead and reboot this server. And again, that is not all that we have to do. There might be some updates that are lingering around. So you'll see this little thing pop up. It's getting Windows ready. Do not turn off your machine. That just means that Windows is trying to get those updates registered in the system, so to speak. This may take a little bit of time, depending on if you have a solid state drive or you have a mechanical drive, or as I like to call, a spinning rush drive. So we'll just wait a little bit. Because I'm running a solid state drive, it should not take that much time at all. In fact, I'd say maybe about 2 to 3 minute stops. If this was a feature upgrade, which in Serverland we don't really deal with feature upgrades, but if that did happen, it would take a lot longer than this. Or if you're doing Windows 10 and the Windows 10 side of things. This is server side of things, so it's a little bit different. So, what we're going to do now is I'm going to minimize that. I just like my boxes to be a bit bigger. So I'm just go ahead and type in my local admin account credentials, and then I'll just say start PowerShell to make it look a little bit easier for you guys. You can run PowerShell from that command box just by typing PowerShell, but it's just not, in my opinion, it's just not as easy on the eyes as this. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this command that we ran earlier, which is this, get-rule list, Microsoft update. And let's see if there are any extra updates lingering around. Because this is something that Microsoft is notorious for. Which they do. There's about 3 of them. So what I'm going to do, I just do the up arrow and just run this. Install Windows Update, Microsoft Update, which this will be accept all of them. Force download, which will download every last one. Force install, which will install every last one. Verbose, so I can see exactly what's going on. Press enter, and then it's going to install those 3 updates that we need. And these are very, very small, so they should not take very long. I'd say no more than about 30 seconds. Again, this is what you do on any server that you build. I cannot stress this enough. Very important. Especially for security reasons. I cannot count how many times companies have gotten infected with ransomware or other malicious attacks because they don't patch the way they're supposed to. Not even kidding. So, once these install, I do not think that we'll need to restart the machine for these 3 updates. These are relating to security updates. So just give it about another minute or so. Which it then has installed those updates. So I'm going to go ahead and rerun this again. Make sure there's no extra updates running in the background. Or lingering or anything like that, which there are none. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the time zone. And yes, you can do this from PowerShell. The way you do it is just run. First, you want to make sure see what time zone that it's set to. It's currently set to, so I just run this get-time zone, and you'll see ID will say Pacific Standard Time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change that So what I'm going to do is set dash time zone dash ID Eastern Standard Time. Also, if you're doing this from PowerShell, make sure that you have quotation marks under anything that has a bunch of spaces in between. Otherwise, the command will not work and you will receive an error message. Courtesy of Reddick. And then, so once I change that, I can run this. Two ways I can do it. You can do a get dash time zone, make sure it's the right time zone, and to make sure it's the right date and time, I just run get dash date, and that'll tell you what time it is and what date it is. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my next command called get, which is get, or is short for get IP, which will tell me what IP address is set on this machine and some other network information. Right now we have that set to .106, which we don't really want. So we're going to go ahead and change that. So the way you do it is new net IP address interface index, which is 6. You want to pay attention to the index over here, and then IP address. I'm going to make this 10.0.0. I want to make this .2. Okay. Prefix length is short in PowerShell. That is short for your subnet mask. We'll make that 24, and then we'll say default gateway is 10.0.0.1. Press enter, and you'll see this show up with the IP address that has just been changed. And then I'm going to go ahead and change our DNS to the address of this machine. Not so much the address of this machine, in this case, the IP address that I just set for this domain controller server. So what I'm going to do is add dash DNS, or we could say DNS, and I can tab over if I need to. Actually, new dash, DNS. Well, actually, never mind. Make this set dash DNS client server address dash interface index of 6. Again, we're pointing to the index, not the alias. Sometimes the alias can be hit or miss. And then I'm going to say server address, and then we'll make this 10.0.0.2. Or if you really wanted to, you could have just put in 127.0.0.1, which would loop back to this machine. Okay. And then last thing I want to do, I'm going to actually, and I'll just make it this, and then I do believe there's one other thing I have to do. So I normally disable IPv6 unless I really need it. So I do disable net adapter binding dash name is Ethernet, which is indicated by, again, by this alias. And then I'll say component ID ms_TCP IP6, which will then disable IPv6, so there's not much issues there. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do, run GIP again, and there's no IPv6. Now, also I've gotten rid of the internet access temporarily on this domain controller. This is going to be our forest. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and run this install Windows feature. The way you can see all the roles that you have available to you on your server, if you're running Windows Server, this is how it's done. Just run get that Windows feature. Very simple command. Basically, it tells me all of the server roles that I have available to me. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of them. A lot of them very similar. A lot of this is very similar to when you run this in a graphical user interface, where you got all these different server roles and things like that. We're just going to focus on this one right here. This one right here we call AD-domain-services. So we'll start with that first. So I'll just type in install dash Windows, let's see, install dash Windows feature dash name is AD-domain-services, and I'm going to use this parameter, which is include all sub features of that, as well as include management tools, so that way I can manage this from our side, which I just mentioned earlier. So, and then I'm going to just go ahead and hit restart once I install this. And it's going to take a few minutes, and it's going to just go ahead and install said software. And so there it is. And now I'm going to go ahead. Let's see what commands we have available. So I'll just run git command wildcard active. And sometimes that might not come up, but I can do this though. ADDS deployment, which is what I need to see. So what I'll do, we're going to start up our forest as ADDS forest. Now, of course, when you're running a domain controller, you do need DNS. Active Directory does not work without DNS, so we will need DNS. I'll explain more about read-only domain controllers and the like a little bit later. But right now, we're just going to keep this very simple. And then we're going to call this domain name. I'm going to call this Orange Corp 1.onmicrosoft.com. Okay. And then safe mode, administrative password. I usually just tab through. Do a lot, which is what I like about PowerShell. This is just your safe mode. This is like your DSRM if you have any issues where you need to go into safe mode or DSRM mode and you need to make a couple of changes. That's where you would go through and make this change. So convert to dash secure string. Sorry. I wish maybe I can blur this out. I want to block out that password. Whoops. Sorry, guys. So we'll just keep that because I want to blur out that password because it's going to show up. It's going to show up as plain text. So just a heads up if you do it this way. So I'm trying to figure out a way to block this. Then again, that's fine. So let's say we use this, which I'll probably have to edit a little bit later. But, as plain text, -4, which is what you'll need. As well as nets so it gives you a couple of different options. DNS delegation, domain mode. Install DNS, and there's one more thing I wanted to do, and that was the mainnet BIOS name. There it is. So it was mainnet BIOS name. And we'll call this Barnes and and then I believe that should be it. And it'll say the target server will be configured as the main controller and restart it when this option is complete. That's fine. And then this will come up, and I'm going to validate everything. Make sure that everything is configured properly, and then we're just going to go through, and it's going to create this as the very first domain controller. The very, very first one. This is going to be the primary domain controller. And we're also installing the DNS server on this machine as well. So, let's give it a few moments. And now, they'll say you're about to be signed out, and we'll go through and reboot this machine. Give it a moment. Taking a tweet time, but it'll get there eventually. Meanwhile, while that's going on, I'm going to go up to go to this, and then apps. Make sure all of the RSAT tools that were supposed to be installed are installed. And sometimes this can also be hit or miss too. Notice if you close out, oh yes, also just a heads up, if you close out of RSAT while these features are installing, they will not install. Do not ask me why. They just do not install. So I am just going through and by the way, this only work with Windows 10 Pro and Windows 10 Enterprise. They do not work with Windows 10 Home. So those of you who have Home, you want to do this, you might want to consider upgrading to Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise. Enterprise gives you a lot of different extra functionality. There's some functionality like blocking the Microsoft Store for group policy that you will not get with Windows 10 Pro. There's a couple other things like a credential guard that is an Enterprise product. App Locker is another one, and there's a few, and then of course there's a few other ones. So, while this is going on, we're just waiting for all of these to go ahead and install. This takes a little bit of time because I'm installing about 19 different roles in there. Because it also sometimes the other thing too. Sometimes I have to sit and wait a good. So I've seen this sit on the screen for about 5 minutes. I have seen it sit on the screen for about 10 minutes. It just depends on what exactly do you get. So we're just waiting for this to come back up to where we can log on. Also watching to see these applications also install. We're going to create about at least a good 5 domain controllers. One for each part of the master roles, like schema master and things like that. So unfortunately, this is taking a while, a little bit of time to process, unfortunately. Alright, so I just brought it back up, and it looks like now we have the administrator password. Now, because I have not created a user in here yet, whoops. So the first domain controller is up. And what I wanted, so it's going to bring you over here. Alright. And so now we're in business as far as this domain controller is concerned. Alright. So I can now go ahead. I cannot manage it yet because the machine, my current machine, is not on the domain as of yet. Now, let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. I just want to make sure we're able to ping it and domain controller. About 2. And that is doing wonders, which is what I want to see. Alright. So close out of that. That is a perfect sign. Let's go through, and I'm going to create our next domain controller. But this time, we're going to do it from the graphical user interface. And you're probably wondering, what is all this for? I'm going to explain once we get all of them installed. So what I'm going to do, this one's going to be all graphical user interface. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through Hyper-V Manager. Okay? And you'll see this little box like this shows up. And then we'll go through and hit New, Virtual Machine. Go through and hit Finish, hit Next on this little box. This will say, where did you want the location for this virtual machine. So we'll call this DC02-SRV. And then we'll say, check this box that says store the virtual machine in a different location. And then what we want to do is go to Browse and then look for that path that we may be able to set up through here earlier. So we'll go to folder. Well, actually, we'll go over here, go to folder, and then make a new folder. I'm going to call it BRNSDC02. I like to keep the same schema going. So we'll hit that folder, and then hit next. Make sure it's Gen 2. And you'll see this first option. It'll say this virtual machine generation supports 32-bit and 64-bit guest operating systems. Again, older stuff. This supports newer features. We'll hit next. I'm going to keep this. I'm going to uncheck this where it says use dynamic memory for this machine. What that basically means is dynamic memory is okay. I have, let's say, I can set up a range between 3 gigs and 16 gigs of RAM. Just a hypothetical. But you can set it as much as how much RAM is on your machine. In my case, I have about 128 gigs of RAM on my machine. So it's a little bit different. But you can set between 3 gigs or whatever range you want to set the RAM, and the RAM will then throttle depending upon usage and things like that. So it helps with, sometimes with performance issues. In this case, I'm not worried about that, so we'll just keep that standard. So we'll hit next. And they'll give you this option that says configure networking. We'll make sure we set this to EX2. We'll hit next. And then it'll say create a virtual hard disk. I'll keep this at 100 gigs. And then hit next. And then you'll see this option that says install operating system from a bootable image or file. You'll also get this option of installing it later if you want to attach the ISO later. Or you can do this from a network-based installation server. I cannot check this option yet because we do not have an SCCM or a WDS, which we'll get into. We'll get into that kind of stuff, that SCCM stuff, at some point. For right now, we're going to stick to the main controllers. So let's go up to ISOs, choose our ISO, hit next, hit finish. It's going to then create that virtual machine. And then once we set that up, we'll go to hit settings, make sure that the DVD drive is set up first. And then hit connect. Just like so. And then we'll hit start. And you'll see this little box, the thing show up again. Okay. And then you'll see Windows Server 2019. You'll see this, which we saw earlier. Hit install now. We'll go with desktop experience because we said we were going to use this one as our graphical user interface. Hit next. And then we'll hit next. There's some license agreement. Hit custom. New, and then hit apply. And then hit next. This one will take a little bit longer to install because this is a graphical user interface. And I'll show you what that's going to entail in just a few moments once this finishes its installation. Meanwhile, back to the RSAT, we still have the applications that are still installed in the background, so we'll just continue to install those. Alright. Of course, it's going to take a little bit longer, so sit back and relax. But because, like I said, because we're running this on an SSD, it shouldn't take that long to install. And this is exactly how corporate environments sets all these up, at least if on-prem. But a lot of places are moving to Azure, which I'll get into a little bit on when we set up this our next domain controller. So, a couple differences. So there's a few differences when you're adding a domain controller to another forest, which is what we're doing here in this case. The forest is like the head honcho. The head honcho in charge is the forest, and the domain is underneath that. A forest can have as many domains as you need to, and a lot of other different things. You can do a lot of forest. A forest in Azure world, a forest is like almost like a tenant. And that tenant you can host as many domains as you please. So we'll hit restart. And let's give it a few moments. We're just waiting for that to finish. In the meantime, on the third, so this will come up when you're in a graphical user interface. You'll see this. We'll type in our password. Hang on. I can type. And then we'll hit large. I'll make sure I'll set this to large and then hit connect. By the way, just a heads up, if you like what I'm showing you, please like the video and subscribe. And so I'm going to be making more of these going forward on weekends. And you'll see administrator, which is a local admin account that is first generated when you first set this up. Now, I'm going to click no on this box right here. And of course, because we're using an evaluation copy, I do not need to install any drivers because those drivers, like I said earlier, are piggybacking off of what's coming from the main machine, where they're coming from. So, you'll see the server managers will show up automatically every time you run a server. However, you can disable this just by clicking Manage Server Manager Properties. And if you check this box that says Do not install Server Manager automatically at logon, what will happen is that Server Manager will not show up at logon. So the next time you reboot the machine, Server Manager will not show up automatically. I'm going to leave that running for now. And the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is adjust date and time. And again, most of this is honestly just like you would on the Windows 10 machine. Most of it. And now you'll see that is set up as the right time. You can configure a lot from here on the local server. You can click computer name, you can hit change, and then we just change the computer name. Again, very similar to Windows 10. If you were setting up a Windows 10 machine or whatnot, this is what you will be setting up. Let's give this just a second. Hit close. Restart now. Just give it a second, and it will come up in a few seconds. Okay? Just like I said earlier, if you're running this on a non-virtual machine or a non-cloud service, you will have to install drivers. And yes, it is a pain to install drivers on Windows Server. It's almost like you have to hunt for drivers when you're doing it on Windows Server, because a lot of your driver companies like AMD, Intel, Realtek, it's not that easy to find the Windows Server 2019 drivers on their website. But there are some tricks that you can pull to get those drivers to work. So, we've done that. Let's see what just happened. Alright, we're back. Okay, sorry, I just clicked the wrong button. What we're going to do is, now that I've renamed the machine, I've changed the date and time. Now we're going to go through here, and I'm just going to go to Update and Security. And then, under Advanced Options, make sure this is checked off, and make sure that's turned on. And then check for updates. Again, you want to make sure that this machine, this server, every server that you build is up to date. Under graphical user interface, this is where you would do your updates. Now you can do just as I did earlier from PowerShell, just by going up to Start, click on this little tile, Windows PowerShell, and then under More, just run it as an admin and run those same commands as I just did earlier, and it will do the exact same thing. For those who like to do things remotely, those commands that I was showing you earlier do not work remotely. In fact, I have tried to run those commands and it will come up with a message that says access is denied. I have not figured out that issue, how to resolve that issue yet. It is something that I am still absolutely working on. So again, just something to think about, things of that nature. What else I wanted to mention about? Also, if you go up to the local server and you go up to the other thing I wanted to mention about, this settings piece. Always set this to basic. By default, it is set to enhanced. You can set this to full if you want, but that means Microsoft will get more of your information. So always set that to basic. And yes, the updates are still installing in the background. One other thing I wanted to mention about, make sure that this is turned on. Make sure that there's a couple other things I wanted to show you. Let's go back. While this is updating, I can show you this. Let's go up to type in. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of hit or miss. It is hit or miss. So what I'm going to do is just run it from here. So actually, hang on. Go over here, run this as an administrator, and then hit yes, and then hit VM Connect. And I just want to show you something that we were talking about earlier. If you go over here, pull up the domain controller that we set up in Core for a second. Okay? And then we'll set this to full screen. And we'll go in and type. And then what I wanted to show you was this command right here. And once it's a domain controller, this is already enabled for remote management by default. There's another command, which is this, which will then allow you to, once it's enabled, it will allow me to then from PowerShell, from a Windows 10 machine or whatever machine that has PowerShell on it, it will allow me to manage the server from there. So instead of me having to go to the server directly, I can just remote into it. It's just a convenient feature to have. That's just the way I see it. Alright, so let's see. It's going to take a little bit of time to get this up to date. I'm just going to show you a couple other different things that I've noticed over the course of my last few months of server type stuff. This section right here, i.e. enhanced security configuration, I highly advise to leave this turned on. I know a lot of people hate it because they cannot surf the web on their server. That is not what a server is designed for. Surfing the web, I've seen so many different system administrators and others surf the web on a server. I do not recommend that at all. Only if needed. And even then, I do not recommend it. Make sure if you're going to use a browser, to use Microsoft Edge, it only works for Internet Explorer. That may change at the end of the year because Microsoft did say that they are going to decommission Internet Explorer and you will only be able to use Edge. So just something to keep in mind. I wanted to mention about remote desktop. By default, it is disabled. I would advise folks to just leave this disabled. If you're going to enable it, make sure that this is also turned on, which means they have to have authentication. If they don't have authentication, they cannot remote it. If you want to enable that option. In core, if we go up to the other domain controller that we just set up in core, you can enable this through sconfig. So let's bring that over. Do /administrator. And then we go up to, what do we call this? Sconfig. This will show up, and we'll kind of go into it when we get into the next domain controller. I'll set this other one up through core, but this time we'll set it up through the sconfig. But if you type in number 7, and it'll give you the option, you know, do you want to enable or disable? We'll hit enable, and just type 1. 2 basically means that anybody and their mom can connect to it, which you do not want by any means. So I just usually set this to 1, and it'll come up with this little box that says remote desktop enabled for clients only running remote desktop with network level authentication, which is more secure. And that's it. That's all you really have to do. For the telemetry settings that I just mentioned about in the GUI and core, just type in 10, and then you can click yes. And then it'll give you these options here. 1 being security, 2 basic, 3 enhanced, 4 full. I'll set this to 2. Basic, which is the same way that I set up on graphical user interface. And I just press 15, and it takes me right back to, it'll say exit the command line, but if you're in PowerShell, it will take you back to wherever you were previously, whether it was command line or PowerShell. Okay? So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to close out of that and bring this back up. Just checking on updates, make sure everything's going okay there. And then what we'll do is I'm going to go to hit settings here. And just make sure that all the updates are still running, which the applications are still installing. And what I mean by, and this is what I meant by RSAT, which is Remote Server Admin Tools. I do get these options here, like Active Directory users and computers. It will come up with a message that says, if I could show you the message, to manage users and groups in this computer, use local users and groups. To manage users, groups, and computers in the domain, log on as a user with domain admin rights. Okay? Because the reason it comes up with that is because my machine is not on the domain just yet. We haven't finished setting up the domain controllers. Once we do that, and I join the machine to domain, which I'll show you how I normally do it. Of course, through PowerShell. And then you can it will then allow me to then set up all of my users and computers. You can manage all of your users and computers in an Active Directory just like you would in the graphical user interface. So, just something to keep in mind. We'll also be talking about DNS and DHCP. Very simple, again, very self-explanatory things that you should know as far as server side goes. There's a lot about file servers as far as regular file shares versus distributed file shares. There's a lot about remote access, direct access. Just a lot to Windows. There's a lot of things to cover in Windows Server. Right now we're just making sure that this one is up to date. And I'm just talking through to make this go a little bit, make it look as if this is going a little bit faster, even though it's technically not. Couple other things that I wanted to mention. The biggest difference between Windows Server 2019 and Windows Server 2016. If this was Windows Server 2016, these updates would take forever. I cannot stress this enough. If you want something that is a little more feasible and does not have a lot of issues, I would say go Windows Server 2019. Upgrade from Windows Server 2016 if you haven't already, and just move on to Server 2019. I get that there might be some cost issues associated with that. As far as the big difference between standard and data center, just know that standard is about the license for a Windows standard license is about a few $100s. I'd say about $400 to $500. Whereas if we're talking about data center, yes, when I say this, it may give you a heart attack. The cost of a Windows Server 2019 data center license is about $6,000. It is very, very expensive, but it does give you a lot more functionality. It also gives you more than 2 VMs. So if you're running Hyper-V and you're trying to run a Hyper-V server, you can do it in Hyper-V server. You get unlimited VMs, but that's about it. Or you could do more than 2 VMs if you're running data center. If you're running standard, you're only able to run 2 VMs, and that is it. That is just how Microsoft has their licensing set up. And by the way, for those of you who might be aspiring to be system administrators, you will run into this issue with Microsoft a lot too, and that is their licensing structure. Yes, Microsoft does nickel and dime for their licensing. So if you want, let's say you want Exchange, that's a separate license. If you want Microsoft 365, that's a separate license. If you want the security and there's some advanced security functionality that you do not see, which you do get some basic functionality under Windows Security. And Windows Security here is basically, literally, the almost similar to what is on Windows 10, which I will show you. Let's go back up to Home and go back up to Update Security and Windows Security. So you get a couple extra options on Windows 10 Security. This may change, and I will show you. And if it changes, I will let you guys know. But for right now, because this is an older version, this was the very first version of Windows Server 2019. When they first pushed it out, you only got those 4 options for Windows Security, and that is it. So you do not get much in terms of security. If you want advanced functionality like a DDoS, things like you will see, like if you're into AWS, like Amazon Web Services, like AWS Shield, it does cost a lot of money to run. In fact, ATA is a separate license. Advanced Threat Analytics, most places you will not see them use Advanced Threat Analytics, but if you've taken the 70-744 exam securing Windows Server 2016, they talk about Advanced Threat Analytics. Me personally, I would never use that in a production environment. There are much better products out there that do a much better job, in my opinion, than what Advanced Threat Analytics does. And not only that, it requires a lot of extra hardware. So it's not even just about the licensing, it's about the hardware as well. And even Windows Server, there's a few limitations when it comes to some of the functionality of what you can do and what you cannot do. So, we're just waiting on this to install. I'm just talking about everything off the top of my head, everything that's relating to Windows Server side. Okay, this is where if you go up to manage add roles and features, this is where you can install these roles, which I will show you once we rebooted this machine and we verify that everything is up to date on this server. Okay. Make sure that if you need to add another server to this and you want to manage another server that's attached, to the domain, you can manage it from here. Okay. You also have this option called Microsoft Azure Services, which will probably take us up to Internet Explorer. And because I still have that security configuration turned on, it'll say add, and you'll see this. You'll keep making you click add to do this. We'll get into Azure Active Directory later on, not tonight. But that is something that is very high demand these days. It's a very big skill to have. And if you know on-prem Active Directory, it's very, very similar with Azure. And I'll show you how similar it is. So let's restart our machine. Make sure that those updates go through. And then, I guess we'll just give this a few seconds while this reboots. Yes, it does take a while to get something like this set up. Not so much the domain controller, to get a whole corporate environment like what you see, like a FDA or a what do you call it, a government entity or a large private sector agency. Something like this takes a lot of time. It really, really does. I mean, some people may think it looks very, very easy. There are things that can go wrong throughout this process, as you saw earlier. There's certain things that can go wrong. If you have like 2 NICs or something, just make sure it's in the right NIC card. Again, basic troubleshooting does apply, even in Windows Server side. So for those who may be coming from just help desk, just know that stuff on servers side can also go wrong. Just a heads up. So right now what we're just waiting for this to complete. And once this completes, we'll run those updates again, make sure there's no extra updates lingering around. Then we'll make sure that the IP address is static. You do not want a DHCP or automatically generated address for any server that you built. All servers should be static IPs. Only your client machines or your workstations should be doing DHCP. Automatically generated an IP address. And if you have configured it properly, it should not be that bad. So, once this is situated, we're going to go through, log back into the server, and what you will see, let me see if anything changed, which I doubt. But again, this is all, when you play around, you can do things like this. So go here, make sure that I'm just making sure there's no updates lingering around or anything. Alright. Just give it a few moments. Give it a few moments. It's probably going to take like a couple of minutes. We're going to go ahead and install these 3 little updates. Alright. So, I learned all this in literally about 5 months. I've mastered almost everything in Windows Server 2019. It took me since August, but I started, it was August. I mean, I had some Windows Server experience before, but not at this level. So, alright, now, all the updates are done, let's go through and we're going to go ahead and change that IP address. So what we'll do, let's go up to the control panel. Again, me personally, I just do not like the category view. So I usually do large icons all the time. Makes it much easier for me. So I go up to Network and Sharing Center. Click on Change Adapter Settings. Ethernet, Properties, uncheck IPv6, check IPv4, Properties, and then we'll just say make this, because the other one was 10.0.0.2, so we'll make this one 10.0.0.3. Subnet, make this 255.255.255.0. 0.0.1. It's your gateway. 10.0.0.2. Which is then going to point to the upper domain controller. And then click OK. Click Close. And then what we're going to do is we're going to close out of that. Close out of that. And then let's just go up to, I just want to make sure that, because I always like to trust but verify. So I usually go up to PowerShell, or I can just type in CMD. Does not make much of a difference how you want to do this. But I'll just do ping 10.0.0.2. Again, trust but verify is key in IT world. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about, we were talking about it earlier, was the security thing. Let's see if that changed, which you only get 4 options for Windows security, and Windows 10 you do get extra functionality. Alright? Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up this domain controller. So, we're going to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features, and then you'll see this little box that says this wizard helps you install roles, features, and role services or features. This comes up all the time. You can disable this by checking this box over here where it says skip this page by default. So hit next, and then they'll say select the installation type. And this is for, by the way, this goes for any role that you are trying to install. You can do it from Server Manager, or you can do it from PowerShell. It does not make much of a difference. So we'll keep that as roles. I'm going to then go through. Why is that showing with 107? Sometimes this happens, so then I just need to make sure that go up to not this, but let's go back. Control panel, network and sharing center, properties. Again, I always trust but verify, but that's perfectly fine. Okay, so let's go back up here. Change this. The 107, that will change once we restarted this machine. So hit next. And then you'll see this little box. It says select your server roles. In this case, I just need Active Directory Domain Services, add features, make sure that managed box was checked off, and then hit next. And then, do I need to change anything down here? I do not. Hit next. And then it'll come up with this option over here. Hit next, and then hit install. Okay. For those of you who might be new, before Windows Server 2012, they used to have something called PC Promo, which allowed you to promote a server to a domain controller. That has since been decommissioned and has replaced with where you promote it through either PowerShell or you promote it through Server Manager. In this case, because I said we're going to do this one exclusively to graphical user interface, we're just going to do it through everything from the Server Manager. Let's just give this a few seconds and then this will install. And then it'll give you this options where promote the server to a domain controller, so we'll click on that. Then it'll say add a domain controller to an existing domain. You'll get these three options. Add a new force, which we're not going to do because we just added that under the first domain controller. This one says add a new domain to an existing force. We won't need to do that. We're just adding a domain controller to an existing domain. So we'll just say code 1 on Microsoft.com, and then make sure we have that. And then it'll give you this box. It'll say select a domain in the forest where the new domain controller will reside. That's perfectly fine. Hit next. And by user account name. So we have to change that to this. Administrator. Okay. So that might sometimes it'll say use must apply user account name, so I change it to the one under the domain. So hit next. And then you'll get these options here, which will make this a little bit bigger. Domain name, DNS server, GC, and then regular domain controller. In this case, we're just going to keep these two checked off, leave these defaults, type in DSRM password. Again, this is just your safe mode password. And then hit next. And then it'll say a delegation cannot be found. That's perfectly fine. Hit next. And then select install from media. That is if you wanted to install this from like NTDS util or flash drive or something like that. We'll leave this unchecked. Hit next. And then there's options where it says specify the location of the ADDS database, log files in this file. Again, I highly suggest just leave these as defaults. Hit next. And then you'll get this option where it says view scripts. And you'll get a little PowerShell script of where you can run all of this. So in my case, we'll just click out of that. Hit next. And then we will go ahead and install. So hit install. So let's give this a few seconds. Alright, hit close. Just give this a second. It's going to take a few moments, but we should now have this on the domain for the most part. Just doing it spinning the lovely, I call it the lovely spinning Cheerio. But just make sure this is going through. Now you'll see this show up. We're going to type in, because we haven't created an extra user account yet, so we'll just use our default accounts for this. The reason we made a graphical user interface domain controller is for Azure Active Directory, which we'll get into later. Okay? So, there's a few other things I want to set up first before we start joining machines to the domain. So, you see this? Right now we are just make sure that this works. And you can see, if we go to Active Directory users and computers, and this just verifies that you have Active Directory domain services over here. But alright. And then you'll see this right here, and you've got all of your users. This is where you create new users, which we'll get into later. And that is all we're going to do for now. Come next class, so this is how, so tonight we talk about domain controllers. How do you set up those domain controllers? You're probably wondering, now I know you guys are probably thinking, why is he not joining that machine to domain? Because we have not set up our DNS server the way it's supposed to, and we have not set up our DHCP server yet. It tells you there's a few building blocks. There's a couple prerequisites that you have to have before you start joining the machine to the domain. But we're making some good progress. Okay? So that is pretty much it for this domain controller for right now. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. What we'll do next class will be tomorrow at 5 p.m. Okay, these courses are going to be 2 hours each. And basically we're going to talk about different things on Windows Server, Azure, that type of thing. This is going to be a Microsoft type thing, but it's not going to be Windows 10, so to speak. It's going to be some Windows 10 on here, but it's not going to be A+ level. This is a little bit of a challenge, so to speak. So that's it, folks. Please like, subscribe to the video. If you have any comments or how I can improve the course or anything, just feel free to post it in the comment section. I'll go live on weekends at 5 p.m. I think 5 p.m. is the perfect time to go live. And I just want to show you what next class is going to be. We'll be talking about this little feature right here. And which will be DNS, DHCP, and a few extra domain controllers. Alright? So that's exactly what we'll be doing. Which is right here, this little domain controller right here, and it'll say this computer, it'll say connect, and this will say the server is unavailable. Of course, I expect it to, because we don't have any DNS servers running yet, but we'll get all that configured tomorrow at 5 p.m. Thank you all very much. Have a great Saturday night. Great skills to learn, great skills to understand. Very good stuff. So thank you all very much, and I will be seeing you guys tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.